So today we're going to talk about blockchain, blockchain technology, and blockchain and how it may have application in Africa. So we're going to jump in. I'm not going to spend a lot of time with biographies. I'm actually going to let the panelists speak for themselves. And to start with, I thought what we would do is, before we jump too far into blockchain, to actually explain a little bit or try to get a definition from the panelists about their kind of very short summary of what is blockchain. So we will start with Kami Waldemariam from IBM Research Lab. So just to start, Kami, if I get all kinds of questions about blockchain, people think it's synonymous with Bitcoin. I get questions from my grandmother to my friends who are investors. So if you were to try to put it in a definition of what blockchain is that could cover a span of a lot of people, how would you define blockchain?
Thank you for having us here. So I don't want to take a lot of time, maybe if you allow me. Just a little bit, I want to unpack it, but okay. It's just what is a blockchain itself, it means, yeah, right? Absolutely. So there are actually three major concepts just I would like to put in people's mind. First one is what we call the asset, all right? Everybody knows about asset, all right? So an asset is something that can be owned or can be controlled to produce what we call a value, right? So the second concept we have is transaction, right? So an asset will be transformed from one form to another form through what we call a transaction. So transaction in general is transform this value onto blockchain or off blockchain into what is called ledger, right? So a ledger is, I think, the concept of ledger should be known by everyone. I think the concept started, I think, 2,000 years ago. It was being used as a sort of a bookkeeping of what we call it transactions, right? So the ledger is something what we call is a system of records, right? You keep records in a system of engagement manner in a way that you can refer it later, right? Okay. So now, if you put all these three principles into what we call a blockchain, that blockchain is, so you add a few words on top.
And of course, this is all digital.
Of course, all digital. So a blockchain is a shared, immutable ledger for keep tracking of the history of transactions.
Right.
That's it.
Okay. We'll come back to that.
Okay.
Dr. Sam Yala, I just want to come to you. Dr. Sam Yala is with us, who works at Worldline. Anything to add on how you would explain blockchain very succinctly and simply as a technology?
Yeah, I think that Dr. Kominis has already given a good explanation. Maybe I can just add some of the most relevant advantages provided by the blockchain is that due to the fact that the information is shared between different locations, it makes it very difficult to forge, to change it without that the other participant of the system can know that. So this is really one of, so the technology behind blockchain, as you said, I'm working for Worldline, which is an e-payment transaction company. It's an Ethos company. And we are implementing blockchain technology. Of course, now we are in the, let's say, proof of concept, because blockchain is not really used in mass. But I want just to emphasize that the fact that the information is shared, so there is no single point of failure, and this makes the system very robust and difficult to forge.
So why don't we go a little bit a little bit in reverse of biography, can you tell us a little bit about maybe a couple of examples of how you specifically have worked with blockchain? You mentioned that, and if that's starting to affect Africa, give us a little background on that.
Actually, my background is more currently based in, as I said, I'm working for Worldline in Europe. So most of the examples that I have are from this location. Last year, for example, we Worldline Ethos organized a contest with students coming from different universities, college, and from all over the world. And then 3 of the teams has been awarded. And the applications that were really impressive were, for example, one of the team, I think that it was a team from the MIT University. They've implemented a system to, based on the blockchain technology, to prevent the botnet attacks. So when connected devices are interacting, they're exchanging data and so on, there is a very known attack that is called botnet, like robot network. And using the blockchain principles, it makes the system more robust. And there were also other applications, for example, in the insurance sector, to show how the blockchain technology can can increase the confidence and the truth in the insurance industry. So there are a lot of examples where we are trying to introduce this technology. Of course, we are, let's say, in the proof of concept stage now.
Right.
Yeah, and that's the case for, I think, most of the companies today. Yeah.
So you guys are definitely headed in the right direction in terms of blockchain and data privacy, data security, which is, as we know, front and center in today's global tech world. We'll come back to that. I wanted to ask you, what you've been working on in particular with blockchain, with IBM Research, and maybe a few examples of how it's had application or how it might have application here in Africa.
Right, thank you. So I think just before going that, I want to just a little bit to demystify blockchain and cryptocurrencies, right? Which is important for people to understand what is right. So then they would appreciate actually what is actually a blockchain. It means that how a blockchain could be used in some sense to save lives and to transfer governments, to basically provide, to make citizens even closer to the government, and also addressing fundamental problem on the data. And now you see that it's a movement of what we call it, how do you really explain in the artificial intelligence world, the artificial intelligence systems are actually learning from the data, but that data cannot be trusted, and then using that trusted, untrusted or semi-trusted information to make decisions, right?
So you find that blockchain is almost synonymously connected to fintech and the payments world. Yeah, it's in many people's minds, even though that's not the case.
So I'll come back to that. Okay. So I have been, we have been the premier in working in the blockchain world for the last 4 years, right? So I'm primarily leading a number of projects on blockchain, from digital identities, like that as in Africa, I mean, over 500 million people being left behind having actual digital identity. Because of that, they are being left for getting basic services, like for education, healthcare, and even insurances and all the financial inclusion services in general, right? So we have been working on digital identity. How do you really create a decentralized digital identity by putting, of course, the government into into the bigger play into the creating this what we call the digital identities of ecosystem to enable fundamental services for the citizenship, which is education. So we have been seeing a lot of problems in education. Well, it's teachers, ghost teachers being reported, ghost students being reported, and examination being reported as a fraud, and lots of problems across the education sector, right? So the key to unlock such problems is actually to have a digital identity and then build solutions on top of that one, right? The second problem, the biggest one we do, and what we call in the cross-border trade area, right? So trade is, Africa. Let me give you an example, a very good example of in the trade. So, do you know how many people involved when you ship avocado from Kenya to Notre Dame, for example, right? So
Many,
right?
Yeah.
So just to give you a sense to appreciate the problem, so there are more than 31 actors involved, the actors being authorities, shippers, importer, and exporter. More than 100 people, actual people being involved, and then more than 200 information being shared for just shipping avocado from out of Mombasa port to the port of Notre Dame, right? I mean, I can give you a lot of detail. Because of these, in general, from the sense of the cross-border trade, Africa is being left behind. And if we just solve, so in the trade world we have is what we call is the movement of the actual goods and the movement of the documents, right? So the combination of movement of goods and movement of document costing actually over $67 billion, right? So just inefficiencies. If we just fix the paperless part, and with some sort of the shipment information, you could actually save over $27 billion, which is injecting back to the economy, right?
So you guys have been working on
so we have been working.
something to do that?
We are actually.
So it would be a digital ledger for trade transactions?
Exactly. Actually, it's already done, and it's in the production. We have been partnered with Maersk Line Shipment. It's now the joint venture. It's a public information you can get. So, but to appreciate, it started actually from our heart, from Kenya. Right, so now how global scale could be solving what we call the cross-border trades, right? So another example we're working on in the insurance industries, in the healthcare data sharing, and we're working on a food safety, right? So what we call the farm-to-fork problem, right? So how do you really ensure food actually getting into the people's mouths by tracing back the origin? Right, so connecting the physical world to the virtual world, and then everybody can know actually where the food comes from, what kind of consequences could be, how that food being treated, and then that, I could go on and on these problems. What the other big problem that's related to agriculture, right? So
a couple quick questions, and then I want to come back to Dr. Yala. So just kind of a nut and bolt question. So where this technology that's regulating these trade transactions, just to get slightly technical, where does it exist? Is it an API in an IBM cloud somewhere? Like, where is the blockchain that actually regulates this trade case that you're talking about?
So you know how trade works, right? Yeah. It works actually based on a collaboration between the traders and authorities and the shippers, all the entire ecosystem, right? So where it lives on the IBM, as part of like the Linux Foundation, we have the Hyperledger project, right? Which is the open source, one of the biggest contributor in the open source code base for the Hyperledger. So that's to be very clear that is for the businesses, right? So a blockchain for the businesses where the identity over anonymity kind of thing, right? So identity of the participant in the network is known. So when it comes to the trade context, what you have, trade happens between entities, right? So that entity basically what we call the workflow of a trade, like shipping avocado means the workflow of avocado that involves that getting 6 documents. You have the phytosanitary, bill of lading, et cetera, right? So the document and every involving participant in that shipment lane has to endorse the transactions. So the system lives into distributed network, of course, on top of the Hyperledger fabric, right? So, but the solution of this, what we call a blockchain, the cross-border platform, lives in the network of these nodes, right? The nodes be controlled by the authorities, by the shippers, and by endorsed actors in the blockchain. So okay. I can go on and on.
And just very quickly, so would this have application toward, just to bring it into a local news context, toward this latest Pan-African trade agreement? Could it have cost benefits, or actually benefit some of the trade that's going to come out of that agreement?
So I would like this, my personal statement, not IBM statement. You see, there's a fundamental concept of this connecting entities through the blockchain. In this particular case of a cross-border trade, is actually, that was a mission. How do you really connect Africa?
Right.
So connecting Africa in a ledger in such a way that every transactions and every movement of asset happening, first you eliminate the bad guys, which is basically you ensure transparency. Second, you reduce cost, because why would you, sending a document across traditional courier services, an average cost $200. Why would you pay, right? That reduces the cost, improves efficiency, which is nearly in real time, and also verifiability, immutability, all the properties he mentioned, right? Yeah. So, and then this is done through what I call a consensus, right? All the parties involved in this has to agree. Now, if you look at now the one-stop shop problem, approach we have in the trade agreement, the solution, what we have now, of course, something to be added around the artificial intelligence problems, to be using those data, the data being in the ledger, to do more derivatives and more of decision making on top of the trusted data. Actually, I would say a perfect starting point to connect and enable and endorse such partnership.
Well, personal thought, but it sounds like an opportunity for IBM's research lab in African trade, but I'm sure you guys will decide on that. Shifting back, and thanks, Kami. Shifting back to security, so obviously there's application for blockchain technology in Africa for many things. You're dealing with digital systems, and we've seen, unfortunately for my country, we've seen some problems in securing digital systems. Anything on how blockchain could, you mentioned some of these applications your company had were actually toward using blockchain to improve data security, but also, is there another level, like a blind spot? How do you protect the security of the blockchain information?
Yeah, so actually, before going to this question, maybe I will add something regarding the cost savings that Dr. Kominis talked about. There are some figures coming from the global financial sector saying that, it's a figure from only last year, that one of to adopt blockchain, the financial sector has made a study, and it's proven that we can save up to 20 billion US dollar per year. So the adoption of the blockchain is something that will, of course, come naturally.
So 20 billion in what context? In
the context that we reduce.
We can globally, or?
Yeah.
Okay.
So the financial sector, in the sense that the cost of transactions, the fact that the fraud is reduced, and so on, so globally. So it's $20 billion. And another point, maybe I would like to, something that I would like to point out is, and that is very important for our continent, Africa, is the aspect of the energy aspect behind the blockchain.
Okay.
Because, as you know, in the technology, there are what we call proof of work and so on, and that is something that is really consuming a lot of energy. And I think that if we refer to the Bitcoin only, it's not specific to Bitcoin, but the energy consumption for the current blockchain implementation is about 4 gigawatt, which is enormous. So this is also one of the challenges that we have to tackle in Africa if we want to have this technology really implemented and so on. So this is really something to have in mind. Okay. So maybe some other protocols, and I can ask to my colleague, Dr. Communist. So maybe instead of doing proof of works and so on, maybe you can do some, let's say, less constraints protocol to have less energy consumption.
Right. I'm glad you brought that up, right? So that's where it comes from, the public versus private blockchain, right? So in the private world, or even in the open blockchain concept, what we call these smart contracts, right? So smart contracts are software programs that actually live with the data, they move across. So rather than you're addressing crazy mathematical formula, which is the proof of work in the context of the cryptocurrencies. So what you do in the smart contract world is basically you are validating the smart contract. The smart contract actually is a specification or the requirement of how you do a business, right? It could, depending on the use case you are working on. When it's a trade workflow, which is the smart contract being defined between the participating entities. When you talk about identity, the same. When you talk about healthcare, so each has its own protocol, which is specified under what we call the smart contract. So that basically, you can use the traditional normal computer you have. You could use even your phone for. You don't need to mine. You don't need to solve that crazy proof of work equation, right? So I think we need to distinguish. Cryptocurrency addresses a portion of the African problem, right? Right. So I would like actually us to discuss more often what are actually the fundamental problems that we are suffering in Africa, right? So is it really only a currency problem we have? I mean, there are also different variations of implementation through tokens now without requiring the proof of work. It's now coming up in a very nice way. And smart contract approach is another way, which could be in the case of Ethereum, for example. It's quite good. If you look at the Hyperledger community, again, without requiring that, solving that proof of work, you could just execute what we call the smart contracts. So the power issue. Also, sometimes I see also in the Bitcoin world, the consumption of power actually creating a very, very, very novel research angle actually for people who are working on how to renewable energy side, right? How to actually use the generated energy coming out from the mining back to the energy pipeline. So how do you do? There are a lot of actual research agenda being now endorsed. We need to see in the next few years, but there is also an opportunity for how do you really use back energy being generated, but the consumption, how do you actually manage even the consumption? There's a lot to be done. Still, I don't think it's well understood so far, but we need to invest more scientific understanding on that bit.
Okay, so extending on blockchain and the different applications it could have for Africa, logistics, obviously payments, education, energy. What I'd like to ask in security, just to try to make it a little more concrete for people, what would be some monetizable commercial products that would come out of this? Because we're talking very broadly about the technology, but I think that helps put things in the context as to where does this come into a product? Is it something developed by a startup? And also, I think almost everything has to be monetized in some way or another. And I give one example on remittances. You know, I did a story on SureRemit that's created they're using blockchain technology to create these crypto tokens to reduce the remittance costs and create a new kind of currency for doing transactions in Africa. But in any case, where does blockchain come into a monetizable commercial product? And maybe in your case, it's security applications.
Yeah, I don't know exactly if it's the most relevant case, but I just mentioned it, is in Africa. Most people are talking about, in the land register. Right. Today, the land register is something that is handled manually and so on.
So properties and deeds,
yes,
and things like that?
And so we believe that the blockchain technology can really bring security and also trust in this specific domain. Okay. And so I think that the application of blockchain is limitless, endless. And one of the most known one is Bitcoins, of course, which is getting people who invested in the past in the Bitcoins are very happy today because they have a very nice return on investment. But I think that in the sector of the land register in Africa is something that can really bring. Yeah.
And are you, for example, this startup that you mentioned that's developed a data security platform using blockchain, is that something that you guys would sell as a company or contract out as a service?
Actually, we have our own product, and this one that I mentioned was in the context with students and so on. Okay. And now we offer them opportunity to go further in their work, and maybe in the next NEF session, I will give more details about that. So, yeah.
Well, Kami, I want to come back to you and maybe go a little bit off that last question. And this is something I like to do in all my Africa tech reporting is not to overlook the application of African tech to the continent, but where could some of these localized solutions not just have application pan-Africanly, but are there some things some challenges that are being presented to blockchain here that could actually create systems or applications that would have relevance globally? Any examples you can think of?
Yeah, so one, of course, the example of trade, digital identities. And
so you think like the EU or other trade regions could use some of this?
Partly we did actually what you call live shipment out of the Notre Dame to the US, right? So a platform is just universal. It doesn't limit you, there is no boundary, right? So I mean the protocol, so always we believe in this concept what we call low-cost, high-value solutions, right? Low-cost in the sense that it serves our purpose here, and high-value in the sense when you move to another geography with a little bit advanced one, you just flip the business model, right? So I would like to actually come to that later, but so one thing which is interesting now, what we are working on is called data, right? So a blockchain is about trusted authenticity data, right? So if you look at across every sector, be it healthcare, be it agriculture, be it education, what is common?
Right.
The common is actually about, it's in all these different verticals is what they call the document, right? The document moves from places to places. So we built this, what we call is a distributed blockchain secure doc store. I don't care about this document is a trade document. I don't care this document is a identity document. I don't care this financial application retailer. But I will give you APIs in a way that you can use or reprogram my APIs to manage your document on the ledger, right? So, and you see those kind of low value, low cost and high value APIs that can be programmed by startups, a locally born startup. How do you actually bring those startups to use such APIs to build local solutions and then a global scale, right? Okay. So that's the way now it comes to the cloud into play and the APIs into putting together. And then now using that one, building these AI machines, right, that uses this trusted data to make trusted decisions, right? How do you make those AI models accessible through APIs in such a way that the local community can build on top of that one to do novel solutions from be it land problems you're solving, it will be the education problem you're solving, it could be it's a financial survey or retail finance you're solving, in all dimensions. But how do you really, rather than replicating again and again, build such models, such APIs based on the trusted data, based on reprogrammed models, and then learning from the trusted data, right? And then accessible through APIs to the entire community. Solving a local problem can be replicated elsewhere. Like take an example of M-Pesa, and now take an example of a trade.
Right. So the questions you at IBM, you're working on those questions, and
yes,
we'll get the answers hopefully sometime.
Yeah, see, I'm doing this one of the interesting problem. What we are saying, we always ask ourselves tough questions, right? One question we're talking about Africa is resource constraint, right?
Right.
So what is anybody is thinking about offline blockchain? We are living in a place where we don't have even connectivity. What does it mean, a blockchain in offline world?
Right.
Can you do, these are the kind of things like, yes, we are talking about like remittances. What would be that remittance for my grandmom? She lives in a rural community. Can we enable her, actually, and also the other problem is that now you have seen in Europe like the data protection is the key, right? So data, it belongs to the people. How do you make that notion, concept possible on a blockchain, that human-controlled check and balances, so it's called a policy-driven data access and sharing on the blockchain, which is ideally what you see in our continent. How do you explain that to the people? How do you explain that to your grandmother?
Well, I think the ideal solution would be just to get everybody connected, but that takes time.
How are you going? I mean,
but I know there are a lot of technological apps in Africa. Like you run into, what's the baseline for almost any anything you do in tech startup? It's connectivity, right? So how you run into that challenge.
That's good, actually. The challenge for us is, as a researcher, a scientist, a challenge for us is always an opportunity. What kind of novel solutions you build to people still access where they are offline?
Yeah. And so I know that there are some entities like Netflix and the VOD platforms that have developed ways to stream or to download things faster and cheaper based on the problem that a lot of people here either don't have connectivity or it's very expensive. And I know some of that's been applied to other parts of the world based on things that these startups have developed here.
Right.
So we have time for some Q&A, and I think I want to prompt a little Q&A as we missed one key possible area in Africa for blockchain benefits, and that was healthcare. But if somebody has a question on that, that's great. But we'll take questions. So what I would ask is raise your hand, and if you could just say quickly who you are. And one thing just to say is please, ask a question. I love speeches, but here we want to get as much from the panelists as we possibly can. So why don't we start with the lady right here?
Thank you. My name is Elizabeth Ujeneza. I work with Rwanda Information Society Authority. I have 3 questions. Number one, we have seen that blockchain technology will allow people to keep the same ledger, let's say ledger, distributed to each user into the, let's say, the circle of that specific area being applied that technology. You've talked about the issue of energy consumption. How about the memory? Because each time that ledger is updated, it will automatically be affected to each and every ledger being kept by each individual in the block. So how about the the issue of memory and how do you see that tackled?
Can we do one question? Because I just want to give everybody as much time as possible.
Oh, please,
the second question
I have
okay.
The second one is, let's say the example of product shipment from, let's say, Africa to Europe through that channel. What is required from each user? Let's say the person producing avocados, what is he required as an end user to keep track of those products from production till shipment? What is required from each specific user playing the role in the chain in terms of technology and devices to be able to keep track of that? Thank you.
So Dr. Yalo, would you like to take number one? And Kami, I think number two would apply to you.
Yeah, for the first question, I think this is, inherent, so it's intrinsic to the technology, and I'm afraid that there is nothing that today, at least with the current technology, that can be done, in the sense that by definition it's a distributed ledger, and each time that people who are involved in the system, if something changes in if a block changes, then this must be distributed toward all the people involved, and this has some implication on energy consumption and also memory. So for this part, unless a new technology is built in the future, I'm afraid that this will still apply, unfortunately, and this kind of issue. Of course, the computers, we hope that they will get more and more memory and so on to keep the tracks of all the records. But also maybe it's, we can say that maybe in the future other technology will come, and that will maybe be based on something else that what we know today as blockchain. But with the current blockchain is something.
Thank you. And Kami, it was on avocado. I think the second question was on some of the mechanics of the trade and the export-import.
Yeah. Let me maybe add on what I think currently why we would like to keep on the memory. Why you would like to keep the ledger and the memory. You don't need to keep in the memory. It's kept in the storage, right? So the memory, I mean, of course, you don't need to keep the entire ledger on your even storage, right? So you can live anywhere as long as you actually validate information, right? And the memory is basically the memory used for doing the computation, but I don't think that things living in the memory for the entire time. So when it comes to the avocado, the farmer, is a brilliant question. What the farmer is needed to have is just any individual device and connect it to the system, to individual application. Such simple.
So we get one more question in this. I have to go to this journalistic crew here that asked me in advance to ask a question.
Thank you very much. I'm Bernard Charles. I'm a rapporteur for this session. I just wanted to ask, in terms of regulations, which angle are the governments using to put in place regulations about blockchain?
So both panelists? So I guess the question is going back to what usually you get into, what should governments do? A lot, a little, or try to stay out of the way is kind of where these things go. On regulation.
Yeah. What can I say about that? Yeah, of course, for the adoption, so today, one of the applications of the blockchain is the Bitcoins, of course. And one of the questions raised is to know whether, for example, the Bitcoins will replace the normal money that we are using today. And some people are saying, okay, it could be. Other people are saying it will never happen. And one of the reasons that before this kind of applications, so bitcoins based on blockchain, can replace the fiat money, is that it must have the full support of the government. And there are other aspects where for whatever reasons, people officials can be reluctant on that. So today, the technology is evolving. The technology is being deployed, and I think that some initiatives are taken to regulate, to enforce, and so on, but we are still far from a full regulated system, let's say that.
And I just want to point that, just jumping off from that quickly to direct the question a little bit more. Kami, are there any examples, I think maybe Kenya has one, but any quick examples you can say of where governments, or even Pan-Africanly, the African Union, has started to delve into how do we regulate blockchain technology on the continent?
I'm not aware, but I would like to comment.
Okay.
I would like to pose this question for the audience as well, right? So have we regulated, let's say, database tools?
In the whole continent, or?
Globally. Have we regulated, let's say, let me use a little bit low-level example, let's say DB2 or C++, have we regulated? So I think what is happening is that we tend to mix things. Like regulations are important because they set policies. So how do we really help the regulators with the right tools and in a way that converting those regulations to what I call the compliance checks, and that can be embedded as part of the blockchain system to do checks at the transactional level, at the data level, and also at even on the movement level, right? So the thing is that there are actually technologies now evolving to help regulators and the government to be part of these revolutionary, in the revolution where we are living, them to actually get the right visibility, what they call, right? So how can we provide for the regulators, the governments, the right level of visibility using tools, right? So that's where it comes to a play. Do we have the right regulations in place? Regulating what, I don't know. But can we give them multidimensional eyes in such a way that they can actually see what is happening, what is getting in, getting out, which is the inbound and outbound problems, right? When we ship currently, wouldn't it be better for the regulators to see what is being shipped, in what condition, who shipped, which kind of banks involved for the letter of credit?
So, but fundamentally, you're answering a question that the private sector should actually
help the government.
Help the government.
Yes.
Well, I think we can conclude on that, because I think from what we've seen in other tech sectors where the approach was we should just have hands off all the way, and that hasn't quite worked. That's potentially an advancement in thinking here in Africa. So, unfortunately, we have to conclude. I want to thank Next Einstein Forum. And let's thank our panelists, Dr. Yala, Dr. Waldemariam. And that concludes the blockchain panel. Thank you very much.
Thank you all, panelists and speakers. I would like to draw your attention to the next session. We will be heading to the plenary hall where we were in the morning for the next special session taking place now. So if you could just kindly make your way to Gasabo Plenary Hall, that would be appreciated. Thank you.